I did not build a boiler factory to impress the world. I built it so that no mother in Burkina Faso would ever have to cook over smoke and tears again. For too long, in the villages and towns of our nation, women have bent over open fires, their eyes stinging, their lungs burning, their backs aching. This was not just cooking. It was slow, daily suffering. It was a silent killer in our kitchens, robbing our mothers of health, robbing our children of time with them, robbing families of joy around the meal. And yet, when the world speaks of innovation, they do not speak of us. They speak of billion-dollar space projects, of artificial intelligence that predicts markets, of luxury electric cars that cost more than entire villages earn in a year. They measure progress in rocket launches and stock prices, but never in the smoke that no longer burns a mother's eyes. I chose to measure it differently. The idea was simple, but simplicity is the most dangerous thing in a world that worships the complicated. They laughed when they heard it. A soldier building a boiler factory. Where is the glamour in that? They asked. Where is the profit? They asked. But they forgot that leadership is not about applause. It is about protection. And protection is not only on the battlefield. It is in the home. It is in the kitchen. It is in the daily dignity of a mother who no longer coughs while feeding her child. When I walked into that abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Ouagadougou, I saw more than dust and rust. I saw a place where our people could begin again, with our own hands, our own skills, our own pride. I did not want to import a miracle. I wanted us to forge one ourselves. A boiler is not just a pot. It is a tool that saves fuel, saves time, and saves lives. It is a tool that takes the strength of steel and turns it into the strength of families. And when that steel is forged by Burkinab hands, it carries something no imported product can carry, the spirit of self-reliance. You see, a nation does not rise because it begs for help. It rises when it builds the tools that help itself. The Rasco Baba boiler was never just about cooking food. It was about cooking a new future, one that would no longer be written for us by outsiders, but by us for ourselves with our own fire. And so, while the world raced toward the stars, we lit a fire beneath our own feet. We built not to impress, but to protect. Not to chase headlines, but to change lives. This is where true leadership begins, not in promises, but in action. Not in speeches, but in steel. Because if we can remove the smoke from a mother's eyes, we can remove the shadow from a nation's future. And that is why the boiler came first. For decades, when the world heard the name Burkina Faso, it was in the same breath as famine, coups, or conflict. We were a headline of pity, a footnote in foreign news, a place only noticed when something went wrong. And in those stories, they did not see us. They saw their version of us. They showed the dust, but never the seeds. They showed the hunger, but never the hands that plant. This was not just an image problem. This was a theft of dignity. Because when you control how a nation is seen, you control how a nation is treated. And the West had perfected the art of keeping Africa in the shadows, as a continent always in need, never in command. But we refused to remain a background character in someone else's script. I knew we could not wait for foreign media to tell our story. They would never tell it the way it deserved to be told. We had to write it ourselves with our own sweat, our own iron, our own proof. And so we started small, with a single factory, a single product, a single spark. But sparks become flames, flames become fires, and fires light the way forward. When the first Rasco Baba boilers rolled out of our factory doors, they were more than metal. They were a statement Burkina Faso builds. From the first unit sold, something began to change. It wasn't just the kitchens that were transformed. It was the conversation. People in markets, in villages, in cities began speaking with pride. Made in Burkina Faso was no longer just a label. It was a declaration of capability. It was proof that we could produce something the world wanted, not out of charity, but out of respect for its quality. The narrative began to shift. We were no longer only the nation they came to. help. We were the nation that could help itself and others. Orders came from our neighbors in Niger and Ghana, then from hotels in Dubai, restaurants in Europe, and even military bases in the Middle East. Each shipment was more than a trade. It was a crack in the old story they told about us. And slowly the eyes of the world turned, not in pity, but in curiosity. Foreign journalists who once came to document hunger now came to document industry. Young people who once dreamed only of leaving began to dream of leading. And our elders, who had lived through decades of broken promises, saw a new kind of leadership, not one that talked about change, but one that built it. This is what rewriting a nation's image looks like. Not a PR campaign, not a rebrand designed in some foreign capital, but work, visible, undeniable, unspinnable work. When the world can see the steel in our hands, they must also see the steel in our spirit. And so Burkina Faso's story began again, not as a tragedy, not as a charity case, but as a blueprint. The blueprint of a people who refused to be defined by the worst of their past, because they were too busy building the best of their future. In Africa, they have taught us for decades that progress must be imported, that if we want roads, we must borrow the cement. If we want factories, we must borrow the machines. If we want jobs, we must borrow the money. And each time we borrow, they make sure the interest costs more than the dream itself. That is how they keep nations dependent, not by chains of iron, but by chains of credit. I refuse those chains. I refuse the lie that we must wait for permission to build, because a nation that waits for foreign approval will wait forever. So instead of signing loan agreements in air, conditioned hotels with men who had never set foot in our villages, I went to our own people. Welders, engineers, drivers, young men and women with skills the world had overlooked, but I had not. Every component of the Rasco Baba boiler was born here. The iron was forged in African heat, the paint mixed by local hands, the rivets shaped in small workshops that once struggled to survive. We built the supply chain like we built the product, from the ground up, with our own blood and sweat, not with the leftovers of another nation's charity. And here is the truth they will never tell you: when you build from within, you are not just producing goods, you are producing power. Not political power, but the kind that matters most. The power to decide your own future. Every rivet we forged here was one less dependency abroad. Every bolt we tightened was one less excuse for foreign control. We could have imported ready-made boilers from Europe, slapped on a Burkina sticker, and called it local. Many governments do exactly that. It is the easy way, the fast way, the lazy way. But I wanted our youth to see the process, not just the product. I wanted them to learn skills, to own those skills, to teach those skills to the next generation. Because a skill in the hand of a young man is a passport he does not need to use. We did not just make a boiler, we made an economy around it. Transporters earned steady work hauling steel and finished goods. Women's cooperatives specialized in packaging and branding. Mechanics opened repair hubs in towns that had never had an industrial service before. Metal forges that were once silent now roared day and night. And the money stayed here, circulating in Burkinab pockets, feeding Burkinaba families, fueling Burkinab dreams. This is why the Rasco Baba project is more than a product. It is a statement. We will not rent our future from others. We will build it ourselves. When you build from within, you own not only what you make, but the respect that comes with it. And respect, my brothers and sisters, is worth more than any foreign loan. When we finished building the first Rasco Baba boiler, many thought it would only serve the villages around Ouagadougou. They said, yes, it is good for your people, but don't expect the world to care. That is the way they try to keep African ambitions small, by pretending our solutions have no value beyond our borders. But I knew better. I knew that the world is not a marketplace of charity, it is a battlefield of quality. If your work is good enough, it will break barriers, not because they invite you in, but because it forces its way in. And so it began. The first foreign orders came quietly. A small restaurant in Niger wanted 10 units. A hotel in Mali wanted 15. A food processing plant in Senegal wanted 50. Each 1 cent payment before delivery, because they had heard that in Burkina Faso, we were building something that didn't fail. Then came the unexpected orders from beyond the continent. A catering company in Naples. A hotel chain in Dubai. A commercial kitchen supplier in Lithuania. We did not have to beg them to buy. They sought us out. Because the Rasco Baba did what most imported products could not. It combined durability, efficiency, and affordability. And every time one left our factory, it carried more than just metal and screws. It carried a message made in Burkina Faso. That label was not a formality. It was a challenge to the global market. It was proof that the words African-made did not have to mean low quality or charity product. It could mean world-class. Do you know what happened next? The same people who once mocked the idea of an African boiler began to study it. Some tried to copy it. Others tried to buy the design. They offered us large sums of money to transfer the patent on the condition that production be moved overseas. I refused every offer, because the day we sell our ideas to foreign factories is the day we hand back our independence. Exports grew, and with them, the confidence of our people. In markets across Africa and beyond, buyers began asking not just for Rasco Baba, but for other Burkinabe products. Our engineers received calls from abroad for collaboration. Our youth saw that their hands could create goods that would travel the world without them having to leave their soil. That is how you conquer borders. Not with speeches, not with flags, but with products that force the world to respect you. The Rasco Baba is more than a boiler. It is a passport for Burkina Faso. A passport stamped not in ink, but in steel pride and unshakable African resolve. The moment the Rasco Baba began crossing borders, the smiles from certain foreign partners began to fade. You see, they were comfortable with Burkina Faso producing cotton for their factories, cocoa for their chocolate, and gold for their banks. But they were not comfortable with us producing technology that could compete with theirs. First came the subtle moves. Delays at ports, unexplained safety inspections for our exports, sudden increases in import duties in certain countries. It was as if invisible hands were trying to slow the spread of our work. Then came the legal games, patent challenges from companies that had never made a boiler in their lives, but suddenly claimed they had similar designs. The message was clear. You are allowed to produce, but only what we approve. You are allowed to sell, but only where we decide. I stood before my people and told them the truth. This is not about a boiler. This is about ownership. They are not trying to stop a product. They are trying to stop an idea. The idea that Africa can stand without leaning on anyone's shoulder. We responded the only way a sovereign people should, by doubling production. If they blocked our shipment at one port, we sent it through another. If one country raised taxes on our product, we found 3 others who wanted it more. If they claimed our design, we improved it until their claim became meaningless. They tried to tempt us with the oldest trick in the book, the buyout. Offers came in with numbers so large they made even some of our friends hesitate. Sell the design, they said, and we will make you rich. But rich in what? In money that loses value while we lose control. I told them, no man sells the roof over his children's heads for a pile of coins. Our resilience was not just in production, it was in principle. We refused to register the patent in foreign hands. We refused to allow manufacturing to leave Burkina Faso. We refused to let the story of the Rasco Baba become another tale of African innovation stolen and rebranded abroad. This fight was bigger than me, bigger than the factory. It was about setting a precedent that when Africa creates, Africa keeps. And in this, every Burkinabe became part of the resistance. The engineers improving designs, the welders working late into the night, the truck drivers carrying our products across dusty roads, the mothers who proudly said, "My son built that." Sovereignty is not declared in speeches, it is built in workshops, guarded in negotiations, and defended at every border. And with every unit of Rasco Baba that left our soil, we were not just selling a boiler, we were exporting the proof that African resilience cannot be bought, blocked, or broken. The Rasco Baba was born in a factory, but its impact could not be contained within those walls. What started as steel, bolts, and a dream soon began to transform villages, towns, and entire communities across Burkina Faso. I would travel to the countryside and see something extraordinary, a single Rasco Baba in the corner of a roadside eatery, serving hot meals to hundreds each day. In schools, the boilers made it possible to prepare clean, warm food for children who once survived on cold leftovers. In hospitals, they sterilized water and equipment, reducing infections and saving lives. In every place it appeared, it was more than a machine. It was a force multiplier for human dignity. Employment began to grow, not just in the factory but across the country. Farmers had new buyers for their produce. As restaurants and bakeries expanded their menus, small businesses flourished, knowing they could cook faster, serve more, and waste less. Young apprentices learned welding, mechanics, and electrical skills in our training programs, preparing for futures where their hands would never be idle and their minds never dependent. And something deeper began to change, the way our people saw themselves. For too long, we were told that innovation was born in foreign laboratories, that African factories could only assemble, not invent. But now, every man, woman, and child could point to a product in their own home, in their own village, and say with pride, "This was made by us." I remember one young man, no more than 19, who stopped me in Bobo, Dioulasso. He said, "Captain, before the Rasco Baba, I thought my only future was to leave for Europe. Now I work in a kitchen that uses it every day. I earn enough to support my mother, and I'm learning to build one myself." That is transformation, not in statistics, but in the choices our youth now see before them. Even our culture began to shift. We stopped seeing foreign as the gold standard. We stopped assuming that what comes from abroad is automatically better. We began to trust our own craftsmanship, our own minds. And in that change of thinking lies the seed of true independence. The Rasco Baba didn't just improve kitchens. It fed the hunger for self-reliance. It didn't just bring efficiency. It sparked imagination. It didn't just create jobs. It restored dignity. That is the power of African innovation when it is not for sale, not for surrender, and not for imitation. When it is rooted in our soil and grown with our sweat, it has the power to transform not only the economy, but the soul of a nation. It began as a Burkinab creation, but soon the Rasco Baba became a name spoken in markets from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. African traders, engineers, and chefs saw in it something rare, a product that was not imported, not rebranded, not dictated by foreign blueprints. It was ours. When it reached Ghana, the reception was overwhelming. Local newspapers wrote, "This is proof that African industry can feed African demand without bending to foreign dependence." In Mali, I watched as a cooperative of women pooled their earnings to buy their first unit. They danced around it, not because it was a machine, but because it was a liberation from the hours they once spent cooking over smoky fires. Even countries that had never traded much with Burkina Faso began sending delegations. They wanted to see the factory, to study our processes, to understand how we had managed to design, build, and distribute a product that could hold its own in the global market. And when they saw it, something lit in their eyes. The realization that if Burkina Faso could do it, so could they. But with recognition came the predictable whispers from across the oceans. "This is dangerous," they said in private meetings. "An Africa that manufactures for itself is an Africa that will question the old trade rules." They were right to be concerned, because this was no longer about a boiler. This was about shifting the balance of economic power. The Rasco Baba began to feature in Pan-African conferences, not as a mere appliance, but as a case study in economic sovereignty. It was displayed alongside maps of trade routes, that bypassed Europe entirely, proof that intra-African commerce was not a dream, but a present reality. In Addis Ababa, during an African Union gathering, a delegate from East Africa stood up and said, "When I see the Rasco Baba, I see the Africa my grandfather dreamed of, where our hands build the tools that feed our people." The applause that followed was not just for Burkina Faso. It was for the vision of a self-sufficient continent. And so, the Rasco Baba became more than a product. It became a banner. When our trucks crossed borders, they didn't just deliver steel and valves. They carried a message Africa can provide for itself. And every delivery was a quiet act of rebellion against the centuries-old narrative that our future must be imported. To this day, when I see one of our machines working in another African country, I am reminded that symbols are powerful. They inspire the farmer, the student, the builder. And when a continent shares a symbol, it shares a dream. The Rasco Baba became that dream. And it told every African child that we do not have to ask for permission to rise. The rise of the Rasco Baba did not go unnoticed. At first, the global system laughed. They called it a small project in a small country. But when orders began pouring in from across Africa, when we stopped importing foreign machines, when our balance sheets no longer bled into European bank accounts, the laughter turned to unease. Suddenly, I began to receive friendly visits from ambassadors. They came with polite smiles and long lists of suggestions. Perhaps you should consider licensing the design to an international firm for efficiency. Perhaps opening your markets to more imports will ensure better competition. But I knew what they meant. They wanted our innovation in their hands, our profits in their pockets, and our people back on their knees. When we refused, the threats came cloaked in the language of diplomacy. You may face challenges with supply chains. There could be difficulties accessing certain parts or materials. And soon enough, those challenges appeared. A European supplier suddenly doubled prices. A shipping route was abruptly under review. International banks slowed down transactions for our factory. This was not coincidence, it was a siege. But we adapted. We sourced locally. We partnered with African suppliers. We repaired what others would throw away. They wanted to choke us. Instead, they forced us to become even more self-reliant. The pressure didn't stop. Reports began circulating in foreign media. Burkina Faso's manufacturing methods questionable. Concerns over product safety in African kitchens. Not a single accident had occurred, but the headlines were designed to plant doubt. We understood the game, discredit the product, weaken the demand, reclaim the market. I stood before our workers and told them, they want us to believe that success is only valid if they approve it. They want us to think our hands are incapable of building quality. But every Rasco Baba we produce is a declaration of war against that lie. And so we pushed harder. We increased production. We sent our engineers to train in other African countries, sharing knowledge freely. We offered replacement parts at cost to prove our commitment to the people, not the profit. Every move we made was not just business, it was resistance. They could not understand it. In their world, corporations fight for patents, governments fight for markets, and the people are left behind. In our world, the people are the market, the nation is the shareholder, and the victory belongs to all. The confrontation with the global system taught us something essential. You cannot beg for respect in the halls of power. You must seize it on the ground with your own tools, your own hands, and your own courage. And in that battle, the Rasco Baba was no longer just a machine. It was a weapon.